All right. It sounds like people are still wandering around lost out in the parking lot, but it's 15 minutes over. We probably should get started. And this is the fastest everybody has sat down. So I think that my threat all this time has been slowly working. This is excellent. So I'm David Nickel, Solar Washington. So I'm going to start off by just saying thanks a lot to all of our sponsors. And I think that they really contributed quite a bit to the Solar Summit going so well as also. So I'd like to just especially say thank you for that. As per usual, we will all be getting together for dinner afterwards. Whoever wants to show up for dinner and drinks, I certainly am going to because I'm hungry, but it's at the Finney Market Pub up the street. And I have a new electric car, so people can ride with me. So very excited. So let's see here. We have a fairly full evening, and we started a little bit late, but let's see. First, we have an announcement from Pam on a project she's working on. Patrick didn't give me a lot of details in the email. He said radio station Delio. So you're going to have to.
This is to establish low-powered radio stations. Low-powered radio stations around the region. And this is because the FCC allowed this to happen, what with extra space on the dial because of digital. So there are quite a few of us, including the station I'm working on is in Ballard. The idea is it's the neighborhood radio station, so it's community radio station. Online, Bainbridge already has one. Vashon Island has one up and running. University has one. I think they're about ready to go. The one in Ballard, we won't be on the air until probably June. But also University District, anyway, all around the region. And my hope with Solar Washington is that you guys can help us get the word out to people because, of course, it's all about listenership. But I think these will also be excellent opportunities for those of us that are interested. Low power stations are going to be part of the emergency broadcasting system. In many cases, people are going to need solar battery backup for emergency. So if anybody's interested in that part of the project, that would be something that would be fabulous. In our case, the antenna that I'm working on is going to be on the Norse home, so we will have a gas generator backup. But a lot of these stations aren't going to have have that privilege. The other thing is, if you have a solar company, of course, it's a great way to do underwriting. So get the word out about your company. And then also, of course, as individuals, if you're just interested in radio, people are pitching in and saying what kind of programs they want to do. And of course, I want to do something on solar renewable energy, talking about the energy mix, etc. So anyway, that's another way that you might want to be involved. And of course, we're the experts on that subject. So anyway, I'll let you know as things roll along, especially with the Ballard station. But we really are covering quite a few areas, so lots of opportunity.
Got a question back. Sure, that's fine. Come on up.
I'm Louise Petrozello. I'm the director for the Clean Energy Technology Program at Shoreline Community College, and I just want to alert the group here that this winter, starting January 4th, we're going to offer a new class, an introduction to battery-based PV design. So please, if you're interested, or send your designers, come see me, and we'll get you in the class this winter. Thank you.
So, question about that class: who's teaching it? Oh, perfect. Okay. Off work hours. Excellent. Cool. Okay, and then let's see. So before we go to our next thing, Pam, I was just going to mention that I don't know if you know, but my company also does telecommunications consulting. So if you need any help, I'm sure we could help you out. And then I've also been working on a bunch of Seattle City Light projects recently, where they maintain substations to support their telecommunication infrastructure, and they're doing a big swap out of all of their battery backup systems. And I don't have a lot to do with that, but what I've been finding is that the systems that I am seeing, these are typically just regular old batteries, but they've only been discharged like 5 times in their entire life cycle, but they're still getting swapped out, and so they're perfectly good, and you could probably get your hands on a whole bunch of batteries that way if you wanted to. So just a thought, talk to Jack maybe. But yeah, let's see. So for our next part here, we have a post-Solar Summit discussion Q&A, and I believe this is going to involve my board members, right? So you guys want to come on up? We got chairs here for you.
This was our chance to bring back to Solar Washington members what happened at the summit, but as looking at the audience, I'm thinking that you were all there. Was there anyone here who was not at the Solar Summit? Okay, well, what do you want to know? And just to be clear, we should keep this pretty short because we want to get to our, we're a little behind. So, I mean, I can tell you my takeaway was, wow, solar has been really successful in the residential market. We are, latest I heard, not at the summit, but just latest I've seen, we have 55 megawatts installed in Washington. Wow, that's a huge increase even just from last year. And as people are rushing to get their systems in before the tax credit expires at the end of 2016, we're just seeing increasing speed. And it doesn't seem to be daunted by the fact that all the utilities, the major utilities, are hitting their incentive caps and have sent out messages to their existing solar customers saying, expect that the incentive will be 20 or 30% lower next June. Of course, that's a big question mark. We don't know. And we're all hoping that there will be a fix in the legislature. So maybe that was my biggest hope out of the Solar Summit, was that we would agree on a simple proposal to the legislature to fix the incentive program. And there were a few precepts that the incentive would be clear, guaranteed, and what else? And fair. Fair to existing customers who went solar with a certain understanding, even though there was that fine print that the incentives could be ratcheted down. And existing customers basically went solar because they looked at the numbers and they believed that it was a good thing to do, but the numbers helped. And now they're learning that, in fact, the incentives may be lower than they were expecting, and it's kind of a shock. And we would like to honor what they were expecting at the same time as bringing new people in at a much lower incentive, recognizing that the market has changed. All this volume has helped bring prices down, and so that's my takeaway.
You know, so I was just telling these two that most of my time and attention at the Solar Summit was on making sure I didn't screw anything up. So I wasn't paying a lot of attention, honestly, to what was going on. I was mostly stressing about, trying to make sure everything went well. But a couple of things that stood out to me, and I'm curious about feedback from all of you since you were all there. This should really be kind of more of a participatory event, but it seemed like, every year that I've been coming to Solar Washington for the last 5 or 6 years, every January we see these numbers from the utilities showing how the industry is growing, and it seems like it's growing at kind of a almost vertical curve at this point. But the penetration rates in Washington State don't seem to be changing proportionally. I mean, we're installing a ton of solar, but I think we're still under 2% or something like that, aren't we? Is that right? Yeah, I'm looking at YouTube because I figure you'd know. Really, still, even though we're just growing as fast as we are. So that was really surprising to me. And the other thing, yeah. Well, and the other thing that really, stood out to me, I mean, I'm putting in my own system soon, and what I found just in doing the research and looking around, is it seems like because of the uncertainty of the incentive, I'm going to go all out of state, and I'm going to get the cheapest equipment I can while it's still tier 1, essentially. And I was getting a very low parts cost. Of course, it doesn't include labor because I'm doing it myself. But it seems like that's going to be kind of where the industry is headed, is very cheap equipment, taking 15 cents, in your incentive rate. And then if you get derated by 20 or 30%, it's not that painful as it would be if you were getting 54 cents. But it also at the same time seems like, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I was paying 8 cents per kilowatt hour to Seattle City Light. Now I'm paying 12. So, it kind of makes me wonder, at what point do we see a convergence of lower installed prices and increased electrical prices, make it kind of work without much of an incentive. And so it seems like it would be really easy, or easier, I should say, from a legislative standpoint, to approve a much smaller or much lower per kilowatt incentive that didn't really rely on in-state manufacturing or whatever to, sorry, Dan, I'm sitting right next to you. I know, right? I'm just going to kind of lean over here a little bit. Yeah, right. But yeah, that's kind of my takeaway on it.
No hard feelings. No, definitely. I would say I was very impressed with the group that came, and yeah, to what Linda said, it's amazing how much has been installed. I've been going to summits for now 10 years, and this one is looking at the numbers. It's amazing seeing us switch from kilowatts into megawatts. So very impressed. There are some lessons we got to learn in here to grow the industry the right way, how to keep it going, keep it healthy. So I was very impressed that we did get a working group formed afterwards. Jeremy's going to speak, I think, on that later. So I felt really good that we have some good progress that's going there. Yes, there's challenges how to go. I've related this to it's like a bicycle with training wheels. There's a point we're pedaling now. We're going pretty good. We have to lean on the training wheels once in a while, but we're growing really good now, and now it's time to how to get ready to be brave and go without training wheels as much. So we've got some good. Overall, I had a good impression of the group. So, any other questions from outside?
If you have feedback, we have another microphone actually, so get that going. Thanks.
Just point of information that we did pass that original law because both sides of the legislature wanted to see us build factories in Washington. So, that's a bottom line. And then I think that there is this pain point that they're not recognizing in terms of the people that would, if they really do lose. I mean, we're getting letters that our customers are sending on to, how retired people who really do expect that 54 cents, and it's not going to be something that's going to be easy for them. I think our salespeople have been really, really good about letting people know what to expect. I think it has slowed down sales, plus the fact that iTech is sold out until next year. We're sold out until we're busy until next year. So, and at the same time, people, are thinking about the tax, not getting the tax credit this year. For some people, that's a deal breaker. They have to go on and find another company. I don't know how they find another factory, but anyway, if people have stored up, companies are in good shape if they stored up. They're nuts for the winter, I guess. But anyway, the people that are hurting are going to hurt. And I've encouraged them to let the utility know, because when the utilities said to me at the summit, "Oh, we haven't really heard many complaints," I'm like, "Oh, you're not talking to my customers."
So, at the risk of getting things thrown at me, I guess I'm wondering. We did that. Solar Washington did that survey a little while ago, right? The job survey and the kind of economic benefit and development survey. And so, one of the things we saw, and I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I believe there are approximately 1,000 solar jobs in Washington State. And so we counted, everybody from people who worked at Platt to people who worked for, Puget Sound Solar to people who worked for iTech. And, the impression that I kind of came away with was that the purpose of the incentive, one of the purposes of the incentive, as you pointed out, was to bring factories into the state. And I think that, to me, that's kind of code for bring jobs into the state more than anything else. Right. But I mean, if we have 1,000 jobs, let's say, involved in solar in Washington State, and we have maybe 100 of those jobs involved in actually making the equipment, right, then it seems like the real jobs for living wage jobs are actually in the installation work more than the manufacturing. Now, that said, I think iTech probably could make it on its own. I think you guys are going to grow to the point where you can actually be competitive, with Solar World, essentially. But still, I mean, it strikes me that is kind of the path, if we're looking to make more jobs, is to get more installation work, because that's where all the jobs are right now. I mean, I think, unless anybody has a different opinion. Get ready to duck. Okay. Well, and they could be totally right. I mean, honestly, when we did that survey, I was sitting on my porch in a cabin up in Alaska, using my, satellite phone to call companies in Seattle, bugging them to, fill out the, dang survey. And Patrick was down here doing that too. And so we only got like a 25% response rate, which is not bad. It was. Right, right, exactly. Yeah, no, I agree, and I've almost kind of thought, and I'm curious, actually, there are a couple of installers in the room, but one of the things we've been kind of contemplating in-house is doing that every year, just doing a survey like that every year to track, the industry, essentially. Would that be something that installers would be willing to participate in or fill out without a whole bunch of heckling and haranguing? Oh, awesome. Awesome. Wonderful. Okay, I think that really needs to be brought up more in the legislature, but do you have a point about it? Great.
To influence the fact that, yes, originally there were 50 factories located here. That was the legislature, that's what we were arguing for, and that was the mindset.
Right. And based on this, at the summit, when I was talking to Mike, I was asking him to bring up the REC, what's going on with REC right now due to the trade war. And he didn't, unfortunately. I was kind of waiting to see how that would go. But, um, one of the things that kind of made me think is maybe what we need to do is try to incent the legislature to give some economic incentives to a cell cutting company to move into the state and take advantage of our cheap power and start cutting Washington State cells. I'm kind of curious what you all think of that, since you're all the industry.
Yeah. And I just had a question for solar installers of Washington. I know there's a potential proposal for a bill, and I just don't know when it will sort of become a public thing that members of Solar Washington could get behind. How can we support you? And that's mid-November? Okay. Because I'm sure that's something that Solar Washington would post on our website as, to raise the profile. So that's my one hope, is that we gathered, we talked about solar, but if we don't, and it's going to be a real uphill push to get anything, now I'm quoting Johnny Bosch, to get anything through the legislature, just because it's a short session, they're focused on McCleary education funding, and so we really need to speak with one voice and tell them that solar is such a boon to Washington State, and do you want to let it all disintegrate, or do we want to carry forward and do something?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And to stick to schedule, since we started late, I think it's Jeremy's turn to tell us about the Solar Washington, the working group. That is unfortunately titled the SS Working Group in this email. Not really quite sure why.
So I'm actually going to hijack my own talk for a second here, because I was on a call this morning with SEIA about the extension of the ITC, and so I just wanted to pass some information along. Just the basic slides here showing how the federal tax credit has really helped to create explosive growth in solar. Next slide. But if we lose the ITC, there will be a significant drop. Most of it, this being predicted by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, most of that drop being in the utility scale sector, but also all sectors would be affected. Next slide. With a 5-year extension, the curve looks much better. So that's the objective. Next slide. So SEIA's been working. They've got really all the Democratic senators on board, and for a while just had a couple of Republicans, but now they have 7 Senate Republicans in support, including, let's see, go ahead to the next slide. So HR 2412, the New Energy for America Act, is the 5-year extension. I know our congressman here, Jim McDermott, is an early co-sponsor of that bill. But anybody who's in other districts, definitely you're going to want to talk to your representatives. Next slide. There's a little language here. I threw all these slides in here because they'll be archived on the Solar Washington website, right? So you can refer to these things. But they've got some sample language for phone calls. This is really kind of pitched to solar companies, but it's pretty much not too much to change it to just individual people. Next slide. So before we go on to the rest of my talk, here's what else they said. There are about 52 tax extenders that are under consideration this year. So there is a possibility that they can get this moved some way this year. And they named 4 bills, the highway bill being the one that's most possible, and that's up for consideration on the 20th of this month. So that's pretty quick. There's an omnibus appropriations bill that it's got a December 11th date on that. That's another possibility. They even talked about tacking it onto the crude export ban repeal. So, you kind of hold your nose, but what the heck? I mean, they're going to find some way to do that anyway. So let's get ours in there. And then there's a customs reform bill, but it's not too likely that it could be included in that. There was a question, is there a cliff date? And they've I guess for big projects, they're trying to soften if there is some kind of decrease. There's a commence construction clause that allows projects to actually hit the ground after the tax incentive drops and still get the original tax incentive. But there's nothing in the 2-year budget deal. So, there is a possibility that it could get through in one of these bills that I just mentioned. So if you're so inclined, contact your legislators. Best thing by phone or to ask for a meeting while they're in town. They did say that emails don't work so well as far as actually informing your legislator, because the legislator never sees your email, and they may just see a statistic about how many people emailed this or that opinion, but to actually get your story, they're not going to get it. You can do written letters, but it takes too long for staff to go through those. So really the best thing is phone calls and try to set up meetings. Ways and Means has already approved some extenders that are programs that are expired last year and this year, but committees aren't really the focus right now. It's the individual legislators before they hit the new year. And the message is not to go after oil and gas credits. Don't say, let's take away what they have. They're suggesting, point out that our country has always supported important energy sectors through tax credits. Simple as that. So make the time now to make those phone calls. Thanks. Okay, now, yeah. Good question. I mean, I think the same things really apply. Personal contact is the best thing, because then you can, and your state legislators are much more accessible, much easier to get a meeting with them. And just, if you're a solar customer or if you're a solar company, whatever the case, meeting face to face, always the best thing, and have a story. Yeah. Okay, so duck curve. Next slide. Or a duck curveball. This and other questions will be pondered in research and discussions by the newly convened Distribution System Collaborative, or DISCO if you want to call it that. That's right. I didn't go that far. Sorry. So this is a group of utilities, policymakers, renewable energy industries, and others who have come together to work on the future of electricity distribution in the Northwest. There's a lot of change afoot in the electric utility world, much of it having to do with the growing use of solar and wind. Go ahead to the next slide, I think. So intermittent and diurnal resources are creating some challenges for system operators in California, Hawaii, and elsewhere. And if you're not familiar with the duck curve, what you're looking at is the top curve on that. This is 1 day of demand on the California independent system operator chart. So there's 1 day, and you can see that top. Actually, there's 2 lines on the top there. One is predicted hour ahead forecast, and then the other is the actual demand. And then the line below that is the net after renewables have eaten into those loads. So it creates this odd shape, and this is because there's so much solar and wind on the California system. During the day, the solar just depresses the loads and it creates the belly of the duck, and then as the sun goes down, the demand ramps up pretty quickly, and that creates the neck. Next slide. But that steep ramp up in demand in the late afternoon is one difficulty that is created by this load curve. So here you can see the actual renewables for that day. This was yesterday, by the way. Those curves are all from yesterday. Yeah. So the solar is the kind of orange one, that the bell curve in the middle, and then the wind is the wiggly blue line. And then there are some straight lines that are just base load generation from biogas, biomass, geothermal, small hydro. So wind and solar stand out as, you know, just jumping around or having a regular pattern there. Next slide. So, you know, the question is, in Washington, do we have the same sort of duck curve effect, or could we? Well, there are parts of Washington that have as much sun as California, so there are places where that could be the case, but you know, there are other places that are quite different. So we don't, you know, is it safe to say that you know, the duck curve is relevant here? We don't know. Go ahead to the next slide. But these are things we'll be looking at with this group. The idea behind mitigating the effect of solar and wind on demand is to try to smooth that out and shift loads and production using storage, efficiency, and control. And these are all, you know, these are all new technologies that are being worked on now. Go ahead to the next slide. So there are other things besides, you know, solar and wind that are affecting these demand curves, and these are things that are, you know, either happening now or will happen in the future that are going to be affecting that curve. So, you know, to increase the load during the day or decrease the amount of solar production, you can put away some of that in a battery. You can move loads around using heat pumps. There's fuel switching, smart buildings. There's all kinds of, you know, lists of things that are going to be at work on this. And in Washington, these things are already far bigger than solar. So really, solar is not creating a duck curve here yet. But our job in this group is to be looking at all these things. Go ahead to the next slide. So isn't the solar customer generator just robbing other utility customers by making them pay for grid services? Even if a net metered customer was a steady generator, you know, without all the intermittency or you know, regular ups and downs, and had a high capacity factor, that it would still be disruptive to the traditional central power station model that we've got. And we don't have rate structures that were designed to accommodate a two-way power flow. So these are the discussions that are going to be coming out. This map shows all 63 utilities in the state. So it's quite confusing, some overlap. But that just tells you how, how different it can be in the state from one place to the next. Rates were also not designed with big load reductions due to increased efficiency in mind either. And so that, these are all things that are affecting utilities at the same time. But at the customer level, efficiency, solar, and EV charging often take place in the same house or building. So this collaborative will be considering all the new technologies that are changing the way we use electricity. So I'll just step through some here: batteries, photovoltaics, transportation electrification, smart inverters, smart grid, and the Internet of Things. So look for us to have some results at some point, but this was really convened through some thoughts that Dave Warren at the PUD Association had, and we had some conversations, and he followed up with it. He's done this sort of thing before, so it's a big group, and it should be very interesting. Thanks.
You may want to. So, this is essentially a chance to ask questions of Jeremy, even though he fled the stage. I don't know if there's any questions specifically. I got to admit, when you were talking about is there potential for duck curve in Washington State, the first thing I was thinking is we have such a huge base load in the hydro that it seems like it would be very, very difficult for us to affect that.
Well, it would just make ramping up pretty easy, Right. Spinning reserve, with a hydro generators, totally different than having to, fire up a peaking gas plant.
Interesting. The other thing I was going to wonder too is I saw a presentation on energy storage going in Sweden. I think it's Sweden right now. All the public buses and in some public homes, they're using compressed air storage. And they're actually literally just packing a ton of air into a canister, right, and then bleeding the heat off, using it for heat, house heating. And then they're discharging the air through a turbine to make electricity, and they're supposedly getting like a 91% return AC to AC. But they're also using it to run their public buses now. And
wow.
I'm kind of curious if that kind of technology is ever going to make it over here. But apparently it's becoming really ubiquitous. I wondered if you'd heard of that.
Not in the U.S., no. I mean, I know years ago there were some interesting compressed air car projects, but that ended up not going anywhere. But maybe that's because compressed air is not so good for a mobile situation, but it's okay for stationary.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Anybody else have any questions about this while we have Jeremy up here? Okay.
The next meeting? January. I know we got one in January, but was that the next one? Dave's looking it up here real quick. There's one in December. Yeah. But is it the 6th? I can't remember which day it is. December 1st. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Yeah. But you can also phone in. But you're on the list. You should, you'll get the info. Okay. Brian. Good question. There's, there are issues with the transmission system as well, but it's not something that this group is going to be looking at. So with the transmission system, you can wheel power from one place to another, but the distribution system is where that power goes to its, or that energy goes to its end use. And actually PSE in particular has mentioned that they're most interested in really the finer points of the distribution system, you know, the individual circuits and how those are going to be affected by, you know, the introduction of more solar or EV charging or what have you. So the focus of this group is really at the distribution level. There are other issues with transmission, like there's just not enough in certain places, but that's not going to be part of the discussion.
Okay, so up next is Mike Massa, sitting right here in the front row from Carbon, Washington. He's going to talk about Initiative 732. Is that correct? Awesome. I'll pass it here.
All right, great, thank you. Hi there. So I am going to talk to you about our drive to disrupt the status quo and break the partisan gridlock over climate action in Washington State. How many of you have already signed the Initiative 732 petition? All right, well, at the end of the night, I will be happy to take your signatures for any of you who have not already signed. The drive's going very well. I'll talk about how well a little bit later, but first, let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to give you my standard pitch that I give out on the trail. I've collected 1,200 signatures for I-732, so I've talked to probably a couple thousand people by now. So my standard pitch is that Initiative 732 puts a tax on the pollution from burning fossil fuels in our state and recycles the money back to you by cutting the state sales tax 1%. It also funds a working families tax rebate that the legislature created but never bothered to fund, and that is a booster to the earned income tax credit. And finally, it vastly reduces, basically eliminates the B&O tax on manufacturers because they use a lot of energy, so they're going to pay a lot on the tax side. They're exposed to trade and could flee our state, and we don't want them to do that and take all their good jobs with them. So we give them relief on their B&O taxes. So basically, it's a tax swap. It's revenue neutral, which means it doesn't change the amount of money going to Olympia into the budget. It just changes how they get it and does something good for the climate, does something good for low-income families. And that's my pitch. And as you can see, it's simple. I can get through it in less than a minute, and people get it. And that's really important when you're trying to do a ballot initiative. The initiative has to be simple. People's eyes glaze over if it gets too complicated, and they're more likely to say no. So that's why we've been successful at getting lots of signatures so far. Okay, next slide. So this policy is not new. As a matter of fact, it's patterned after one that was passed up in British Columbia in 2008. They also did a revenue neutral carbon tax. And theirs actually is revenue negative. They wound up giving back more money than they collected from the carbon tax. They offset a different set of taxes than we did. But as you can see, it's been very successful. It has reduced their petroleum sales per person by about 10% versus the rest of Canada. It went way down during the early years, and then as BC recovered from the recession, it popped back up a bit. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that BC, their price started at $5 a ton and went steadily up, and then it hit 30, and it's parked there. They stopped it at 30, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. They didn't want to get too far ahead with their price. They just barely missed passing legislation to continue raising it a few weeks ago. But so since then, their petroleum use has leveled out, and that's mainly because they stopped raising their price, and now the economy is growing, and so now, use is going up. The reason why we're only talking here about petroleum use is because they have so much hydro up there that the impact on electricity is just not as relevant. Okay, next slide, please. Let's see. And as you can see, it did not kill their economy. This is GDP growth of BC versus the rest of Canada on a per capita basis. They're doing as well or better than the rest of Canada. And going back to the previous slide, you know, one thing to keep in mind here is this is a pretty strong price on carbon. $30 a ton is the strongest in North America. It's one of the strongest in the world. It's about double what California and the RGGI states in the Northeast are doing in their cap and trade programs, and what Europe's doing. And that's why BC has seen the results that it has. From the RGGI states and California really haven't seen a whole lot of greenhouse gas reduction so far from their policy, because the price just really isn't high enough yet. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Let's move on. Okay, so yeah, okay, I'm going to talk about it now. Here is a model from the Energy Information Administration, federal agency, on the impact of a $25 a ton tax on electricity. It actually has a pretty big impact. That low green line, for those of you in the back, is the projected CO2 emissions with a $25 a ton price. So you can see versus the top, which is the reference, which is basically business as usual. So you can see that results in a huge decrease. And basically that's all about coal. Now in Washington State, that's not as big of a deal because we have a lot of hydro here. And we are already scheduled to close Centralia. But in terms of the impact throughout the rest of the country, if our policy here were to roll out more nationally, it would have an enormous impact. This is why putting a strong price on is important. All right, and also that slide is the one that probably means the most to all of you. So we have a good policy. One of the other, in terms of how it works with greenhouse gases, but one of the other things that we actually feel good about is this policy will have a very positive impact on the fairness of our tax system in Washington State. As you might have heard, we have the most regressive tax system in the country, which means it's the most unfair to low-income earners in the country. And it's been it hasn't changed since the 1970s when we stopped taxing food at the grocery store. So this Carbon Washington, by funding that working families tax credit, this doesn't show you the overall impact. This shows you the impact for one case because it's going to be different for each case because the earned income tax credit scales with the number of children you have. So for a family, a married couple with 2 children, right now the lowest 20% is paying almost 17% of their income in taxes every year in Washington State, in local taxes. That doesn't include your federal. And that will drop to, I think that says 6, well, let's see if I can read it better here, 6.8, you can see, 6.8% after the working families rebate is instituted. That's an enormous boost for low-income families. And for the second quintile there, it'll go from 11.7% down to about 8.4%. So it really levels the playing field for low-income families. Our policy puts about $200 million into that program, which is, I believe, actually more than Governor Inslee's plan put into the same program that was put in the legislature last year. The legislature funded the booster at 15%. We funded at 25% on the earned income tax credit. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we have a good policy. The question is now, can we sell it? And so this is some polling data that was conducted back in November, December last year before our ballot language was finalized. It was part of the Washington Business Poll conducted by Gallatin Associates. And so what you see here is that statewide 53% favorable rating, and the language at the top is, basically a statement approximately what our policy would have looked like. It's not exactly what our policy is. Of course, in Eastern Washington, it's a little lower. It's 50%. But and I believe on the far right, the bar chart is the Seattle Business Poll, so 68% within that cohort. Now, the key thing to keep in mind here is this was a poll that in the poll does not necessarily reflect the electorate we'll see in 2016. That's a presidential election year in which the electorate tends to be younger, more diverse, and more progressive versus midterm elections when it's older, less diverse, and more conservative. So, and if you look at those circles, basically Democrats favored it at 70%, younger voters favored it at 76%, women at 56%. So that means this is likely to do better with the 2016 electorate, which is a subset of the people who were polled. Now this is before any education's been done, any campaigning has been done. One thing I will say is that the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy has done their own polling. It's not public, but some of our leaders have seen the data. They like to cite a figure of 39% support when a voter is shown just the ballot language at the top of this, which is written by the Secretary of State. However, what they don't usually tell you is that if you give people a basic explanation of the policy, then the number goes up to about, I think it's 61%. Then if you give them pro-con arguments, it drops back down to 52%. So that's right about where our polling is, 53%. So, and you know, no policy is a slam dunk here for carbon pricing. If there was a slam dunk policy, we'd have it instead. But this is good enough that we think it's worth making a run at the ballot. Let's move on. So we have a grassroots army of hundreds of active volunteers. I am one of them. I'm a volunteer. I am not paid staff. We only have a very small paid staff of about 8 or 9 people. And we have more than 25 chapters spread throughout the state. And that is how we have raised all of our signatures, is through volunteers. And then we also have done some paid signature gathering because, frankly, the reality is it's just not possible to do grassroots signature gathering in this state and get pure volunteer signature gathering and get the number of signatures you need. I did the math, and it's like over 12,000 person hours of signature gathering, and that's for good signature production. You know, if you're a good gatherer. So that's a big lift if you don't use some paid signature gatherers. But our volunteers have delivered a big portion of our signatures. Let's move on. Okay, and here's the results of all that work. We are now at, actually it's 300,000 is what the number I saw today, signatures in hand. We went down to Olympia, visited the Secretary of State's office last week, and turned in 247,000 of those, which is the minimum we had to turn in. Got some good PR. Maybe you heard us on the radio. But we have over 300 in hand, and with this momentum, we are on track to be done by the end of the month. And 330 is a 25% cushion, which is what they recommend you have to deal with signatures that get thrown out because they're invalid or they're duplicates or they can't be read. And also, if you turn in 25% over, the Secretary of State does a statistical sample instead of checking every single one, which makes us happier, makes them happier too. It's a lot less work. All right, let's go on. Okay, so this is a solar group. Why should the solar people care about this? So number one, it's going to raise the price of your competition, which is fossil fuels, in particular fossil fuel electricity from coal and from natural gas. It'll put $25 a ton translates into 25 cents per kilowatt hour of coal electricity and about 1.2 cents per kilowatt hour of natural gas. So that's a big number in a state where you're paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour, at least here in Seattle. It will also lower the cost of installing solar because of the 1% cut in the sales tax rate. So your customers are going to save some money on their installations. It will also reduce the B&O tax for manufacturers. Now, most of the solar industry is installers, not manufacturers, but we do have some in the state, and that will help them out. One other thing we hear is, especially from BC, is the Vancouver mayor has stated that their tax is drawing clean tech and clean energy people to companies and businesses or companies and workers to the province. So we think it's going to signal this is a good place to do business and draw more talent here. Finally, for those of you running a business, a carbon tax has a really predictable impact on your business operating costs. You know exactly what it's going to do to your fuel use, your electricity costs. Unlike a cap and trade system where you have no idea what those costs are going to be because the market sets them on a regular basis. You know exactly where your prices are going to go. Finally, there's no extra work to comply, unlike a cap and trade system, because the tax actually is pushed as far upstream as possible and hits the distributors of the fuel. It does not show up at the gas pump. It does not show up on your electricity bill as a line item tax. It just shows up as a price change. So there's no work. You don't have to buy and sell offsets or hire a new accountant who can figure out how to make sure you comply with your limits. Okay, move on. Okay, so far we have a bit of support from the solar industry. I've been busy out chatting with a lot of you. And as a matter of fact, there's more out there, or I have more in the pipeline from the solar industry than is currently present here. I just haven't finished the discussions. But I want to really thank the folks from Banner Power, ANR Solar, Sunergy, Artisan, Solterra, who have endorsed our initiative. As a matter of fact, Solterra's entire management team decided to endorse it, so the company endorsed it. We also have a lot, we're building support in the clean tech space, from building to new power systems, wave energy, bioenergy. And we also have bipartisan support on the political front, and that's one of the selling points of our initiative. Is it's something that both Republicans and Democrats can get on board with. And we're currently out already starting our lobbying legislative outreach efforts as we finish the signature drive. All right, let's move on to the next one. So why should you support us? And I'm here to ask for your support. Number one, it's a proven policy. BC's already proved that this policy works. Number two, it's good for solar. It is not going to be the same as your 58 cent per kilowatt hour production credit. However, it should be supportive to the solar industry. It puts a strong price on carbon pollution. It will be the strongest in the United States, second strongest in North America, and one of the strongest in the world. It does improve the fairness of our state tax system for low-income communities, one of the potentially disaffected or disproportionately impacted communities. It does not chase manufacturers out of the state, so it preserves our good manufacturing jobs, another disproportionately impacted community. Finally, we've got great leadership and grassroots army that's out there ready to go on to the next phase of our campaign. And 2016 is a can't miss opportunity. The presidential election year is a cycle we cannot miss. The next opportunity is 2020. And following on the heels of the Pope's encyclical and the Paris COP21 talks and all the international momentum, sending our initiative to the legislature in January is going to be really cool and great timing. And I should have said this is an initiative to the legislature, not to the people, which means that the first stop is at the legislature. They can adopt it or put it on the ballot in November next year. Those are their choices. Okay, move on to the next slide. It's the last one. So how can you help us? Number one, sign if you have not already signed, and I'll be very happy to take your signature tonight. Donate to help us finish the final push. We are grassroots. There is no big money behind us. We do not have billionaires writing us $100,000 checks, $1 million checks like some other initiatives did. So I've donated, my friends have donated. This is how we're funding it. Next, if you're a business, endorse. As a business leader, that would be something very important when we go to the legislature. Spreading the word to your network doesn't cost you anything, really easy to do. An email, a Facebook post, a tweet. Let people know you think I-732 is a good policy and that it's something we need to do to solve the climate change problem. If you are so inclined, we would love to have your volunteer help for as little or as much as you would like, whether it's helping us finish the signature drive or helping us start doing outreach as we move on to the next phase of the campaign. And finally, recruit other people to the team. That is what we need to finish. So it is going to take all of us. This is a citizens campaign. We need all the help we can get. We would love to work with the solar industry in particular on moving the overall climate agenda forward. So the last thing I want to say here is I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between the Alliance's strategy and Carbon Washington's. So the Alliance has talked about putting something on the ballot next year, and Samir is going to talk about that in a minute. We basically have a difference of opinion on strategy. They're looking at building a coalition of the left, counting on Seattle outvoting the rest of the state, or Puget Sound outvoting the rest of the state, and that theirs will raise revenue. Don't know how much revenue because they haven't announced their policy yet, but probably significant revenue. We are trying to build a coalition of the center, bring Republicans and Democrats together, especially rural Democrats and and conservatives who basically were the reason why Inslee's bill did not move forward in the legislature this year. But this is an honest difference in strategy. Both could work, but we've chosen the revenue neutral path because we think, first of all, in 2016, with all of the funding priorities on the docket already with McCleary and transportation and all the needs the state has, that trying to ask for more revenue would be risky. If you think about it, in 2016, Sound Transit 3 will be on the ballot for $15 billion. Seattle will have the HALA, likely have the housing affordability on the ballot for $300 million. We apparently just passed a $1 billion transportation levy. So at some point, Seattle voters might get fatigued and say no, or at the very least, it might depress the turnout, or depress the approval rating, such that Puget Sound might still vote yes, but they might not vote yes in big enough numbers to outvote the rest of the state. So we think actually a policy that can actually bring the state together is a better approach in 2016, and not try and tie climate action to raising new revenue for other programs in the state. There are other vehicles that can be used to do that. As far as Governor Inslee's regulatory approach with a cap, that's not in conflict with I-732. The cap and our tax can coexist. And with respect to the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, it's been reported that a carbon tax would be one way to satisfy, for the state to actually satisfy the Clean Power Plan, the requirements. So one other thing just to say is relative to the kind of the political calculus here. I think the fact that Tim Eyman's initiative to give the legislature a very, I'm sure there's a literary metaphor for the choice they have, basically, between, you know, a constitutional amendment or a 1% cut in the state sales tax. The fact that that passed is passing in all but 3 counties, and that Snohomish and Pierce counties voted for it, shows that asking the state to raise taxes in any significant way is likely to be a risky proposition, which is, again, why we're choosing the revenue neutral path. But the Alliance, they have good intentions. We're all on the same team. We all want to accomplish the same goal. We just have a difference in strategy. We just hope you'll support one of us. You know, and this is an audience that's already in, I get it, but just would like you to support one of us going forward. Thanks a lot. What was that? Oh, we do Q&A now?
Probably do some Q&A now.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to do it later. Okay. Any questions?
So I am already holding the mic, so I'm just going to take, start mine first. But I'm wondering if there are any solar installers that have said no, they don't want to support you, and if those do exist, then why?
I only had one, and it was that I approached who said no, and that person didn't even want to talk to me. They were not from the Seattle area. I think just my read was the person was pretty conservative from a rural area, and we know that there's strong support, like on the green tea side in the in the Republican Party, for solar as a liberty, and the right to make your own power and not pay the man, the big electric companies, the investor-owned ones. So I think that's going to be really the only reason, is it's going to be political view. But I think that'll be the minority, not the majority. So far, the people I approach, the only reason they say no is, in terms of businesses, is if, especially in the clean energy, clean tech space, is if they are going to the legislature, say, looking for something, or they get a lot of money from government grants, and so they don't want to offend anyone and want to be neutral. So that's mainly what I'm hearing. But most of the business people I've talked to so far to say, yeah, it's a great idea, I'll do it.
What is the reason for ramping up? Why not just start at $30?
So BC ramped it up slowly, and it was to avoid the shock, I think, to the economy and allow people to adjust. Our policy is $15 a ton the first year and $25 a ton the second year. It then ramps up at 3.5% plus inflation from there on, to account for the normal increase you would have had in the sales tax rate, as well as people cutting their fossil fuel use. So we have to raise the price above to counteract that and make sure the state continues to get the revenue it needs.
Quick question on in regards to like a high coal grid, such as PSE's grid. They're roughly 30% coal. Where would their rates go to approximately?
Well, it would increase the rate by 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour on all their coal power. Okay. So take your 30%. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. I'm with the Sierra Club, and
yes.
I wanted to make a very, very brief statement for you guys in here. I think everyone in this room needs to realize that establishing a price on carbon is insanely important. It's the only way we're actually going to make huge progress on doing things like shutting down PSE's coal strip plant. So I've been working with Yoram on this in the distant past, and also more recently with the Alliance of Clean Energy, on trying to make sure that the prices are sufficient to ensure that we can shut down this coal plant. Yes, they basically are. That's good news. It means that there's about 680 megawatts or so of coal that should retire as a result of establishing a price on carbon. The interesting question is, which policy? I don't want to get into that. That's a very lengthy argument, but we must be willing to support a price on carbon in public. So, thank you.
Hear, hear.
At your price of $25 a ton on CO2, what's the impact on gasoline, on a gallon of gas?
Yeah, thanks. It's 25 cents per gallon of gasoline. The impact on electricity is stronger than it is on transportation, is just the honest truth with carbon pricing. 25 cents a gallon, especially if you start getting gas up around $4 a gallon, is a much smaller move than 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour on electricity. But the BC data shows that it actually makes an impact. As a matter of fact, I think the BC data was a bigger impact than the EIA expected. So it does move the needle. Yeah.
I was just wondering if the differential tax rate for low-income families and so on that is shown to be a benefit from this carbon tax is going to offset the negative press that you're going to get as this goes forward from opposition claiming that this is a regressive fuel tax that's going to hurt the lowest income sector of the population.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. One thing I forgot to say earlier, and thanks for bringing it up because I wanted to speak to this, is any price on carbon is regressive, period. Any tax on carbon, any fee on carbon, anything that raises energy prices is regressive. So we are basically trading one regressive tax for another as an even swap. And for most people in the modeling we've done, it is an even swap. Yeah, and there's a link from our website to some online calculators, one for individuals, one for businesses, where you can actually go model the impact on you. And most people so far find that it's plus or minus 50, $100. And for the businesses we've done so far, the manufacturers, the B&O tax cancels out the increase in their carbon tax impact. So for most of us, it's a wash. Now, for low-income families who have been driven out of Seattle and have to drive into town, that will have potentially a negative impact on them. And that's really what the Working Families Rebate is in there to do, is to give them that benefit back. Now, if they actually live in Seattle and they ride a bus and don't drive much, they'll come out ahead. But I think you have a really good point that it's going to be I think you're going to hear some arguments about it. Yeah, exactly. It's that's what they're going to say is you're hurting people by driving up energy. It's going to be a job-killing energy tax, right? That's exactly what they're going to say. We're just going to have to counter that. We get two shots at passing this. If the legislature actually adopts it, we avoid a very expensive ballot fight and against the oil industry. So, any other questions?
All right, I think we're pretty much done. Wendy keeps scratching her head, and I keep thinking she has a question, so I'm just going to stop looking at that half of the room. But you keep going like this, and I keep going. So, if there's no other questions, next up is Samir Ranade, and he's with the Washington Environmental Council, and he can tell you more about what he's doing better than I can.
Okay. I can just start talking as the thing comes up. Thanks, Mike, and thank you everyone for coming. And I definitely want to echo the sentiments that there's such a small population of people that are really active on climate issues to begin with. So we all certainly need to be united, and that's also, that's everyone's hope that for 2016 we'll all be united around one measure. November 4th, Washington, yes. And so my name is Samir Ranade. Just a little background on myself. I've worked at the federal government. I've worked at the state government. I've worked for a significant number of energy and environmental entities. I've worked on several election campaigns, and throughout my political career, protecting the environment has always been the driving force behind my career. And so now I'm working for the Washington Environmental Council. We're the lead, one of the lead advocacy organizations in the state for climate and clean energy policy. We also have a forestry program and a Puget Sound program. And certainly, you know, harnessing energy from the sun is a priority. Not only is it a clean, inexhaustible resource that will meet our climate and environmental goals, but the rate of solar industry job growth in the country, as I'm sure all of you know, has outpaced the national average by a rate of about 10 to 1. And, you know, there's no question we have strong solar potential in Washington State. I mean, even Seattle is roughly equivalent to Germany, and we're seeing everything that Germany is doing in solar, so we can also do that here. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about is the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy strategy and policy strategy and principles. I'll do a little bit of comparing and contrasting with Carbon Washington, and talk about cap and trade and taxes. Talk about the clean energy potential in our state. You know, what are the carbon sources? What are the impacts of pollution? Yeah, and then current cap and invest policies in place, how they're successful. And then I'll talk about the benefits of creating effective climate policy and what is effective climate policy. I'll kind of give that definition. Next slide. So the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy, just to give you an understanding of it, as you know, climate change is not just an environmental issue. It affects every facet of society: labor, business, human health, racial justice. So in order to create an effective advocacy body that engages everyone, we wanted to form a coalition that consists of organizations from this broad spectrum of stakeholders that are diverse in their background and interests, but unified around the common cause of reducing carbon. And importantly, having a stakeholder process in which we gathered everybody's input, we thought was critical to coming up with a consensus-based policy, and also, you know, sound climate policy, because we have the expertise and we have lots of people who can talk about how they're going to be affected by various policies. And right now, the Alliance consists of 153 members, organizational members, the Washington State Labor Council, the American Lung Association. We have business groups like McDonald Miller, and we have a 27-member steering committee which governs our policy decisions. And what I'm most proud about is that the Alliance has a group called the Communities of Color for Climate Justice. It's about 54 organizations that are a sub-constituency group of the Alliance, and they kind of work to provide expertise to the Alliance to ensure that the policy adopted by the Alliance is not only effective, but it's also equitable. And we announced that we, last month, that we're developing an initiative to introduce to the voters in 2016. The core structure of our policy is fairly set, but we're still ironing out a few details. So the final version of our policy will be available in January. That's when we would begin collecting signatures, and that would go from January to July, and then would be on the November ballot. And I want to talk about the three guiding principles. Next slide, please. And also note that, you know, while we certainly respect all of Carbon Washington's efforts, and we can't lose that momentum, we are also urging you to, at this time, to not endorse Carbon Washington's policy until you've seen our policy. And so we'll go more into this, but could you go back to the other slide? So I want to talk about the three principles that guide the Alliance. The first one is it has to be effective. It has to actually reduce carbon and not make the carbon tax or fee just a cost of doing business. Because if that's the case, then we know that emissions aren't going to go down. And we also have to prevent leakage, where a business just moves to another jurisdiction and continues emitting, then that doesn't really solve the problem. It also has to be equitable, because low-income communities and communities of color are already suffering disproportionately from the impacts of carbon pollution in terms of lung disease, respiratory problems. They can also least afford to pay for the rising cost of food, water, shelter, healthcare that's being caused by carbon pollution. So the policy should invest in reducing carbon in disadvantaged communities in urban and rural areas that are defined by, you know, economic hardship and poor environmental health. And yeah, I mean, these investments should go to building low carbon infrastructure in these areas to ensure equity. They should create widely available employment opportunities, and we should provide for transitioning workers from the fossil fuel economy to the clean energy economy. And if you guys are curious to know more about this, I'd look up the Blue-Green Alliance, which just wrote a letter today to President Obama's negotiator, Todd Stern, to thank him for including language on a just transition for fossil fuel workers to be able to transition into the clean energy economy. That's what they're including in Paris, and that's the kind of policy we need here to be effective too. And of course, viability, because we don't take the idea lightly of going to the ballot. I mean, people have been hungry for a carbon price for a long time. We want to be thoughtful, we want to be deliberate, and we believe the breadth of our coalition is enough to deliver a victory for us. We've been conducting polling research in the field. As Mike mentioned, we originally tested five ballot languages, including Carbon Washington's. Our polling found that initially Carbon Washington's, people looked at Carbon Washington and only 39% of the people supported it, in part because their ballot title says this is an initiative concerning taxes. And yes, while it is possible to bump that up to 60 once people are educated about it, we also have to keep in mind that the oil industry isn't going to sit on the sidelines. They're also going to pour in tens of millions of dollars on the other side. So it's going to be hard to bump it from 39 to 60. Our polling has shown that voters in our state are most supportive of a policy that establishes a cap on carbon pollution, raises revenue, and invests it in clean energy and solving the problem. And so we can certainly say that the Alliance will, our policy, when it's developed and out, will have a cap. It will charge a fee for polluters. And even within cap and invest systems, you can have certainty on the price of permits by setting a price ceiling and a price floor. So we'll charge for the charge polluters for their pollution, and we'll invest it in cutting emissions. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of where our emissions are. Obviously, solar can take up a significant amount of the electricity consumption part. I'd like to ask all of you guys whether it can take up the commercial and residential, which I think that's primarily from natural gas and oil for heating. But I'd like to see whether solar thermal, we can also heat our homes with solar instead of natural gas. And it could also probably take up some space in the industrial sector, I think. And certainly in transportation, we're going to need to build out more and more energy as we want to electrify our fleet, more renewable energy. So there's a big opportunity for solar to cut into transportation, on-road gasoline, which is 23%. Next slide. And this is indeed possible. There's a report by a Stanford professor, brilliant guy, Mark Jacobson, who said that by the year 2050, Washington State can actually move to a 100% renewable energy and energy efficiency economy in the industrial sector, transportation, airlines, electricity, buildings. A vast majority of that would be onshore wind. Hydro would be about a third. You can see utility scale PV at 12%. Residential PV is there. And I think, yes, in the beginning, putting a charge on carbon can be regressive, but it's important to dispel that notion, because going forward, actually investing in clean energy resources lowers energy costs overall. So this report also found out that by the year 2050, annual energy costs will decline $80 a year per person, because energy efficiency saves money, and as you put more and more money into renewable energy, you scale the market and costs decline. And then annual health costs will save $950 a year on that, and of course, there will be avoided climate costs. And so we believe that we can achieve this goal, but we need good policy to do it. Next slide. And so I'm going to pause there from talking about the policy to go into a little bit about the impacts. Because, so Citibank came out with a report recently that said the global economy will pay about $44 trillion in costs through the year 2040 if we don't address climate change. And as all of you guys probably know, I mean, that comes from the wildfires, the salmon dying, the droughts, there's ocean acidification, and there's also asthma and kids getting adversely affected. There's also a co-pollutant problem where when you emit carbon dioxide from landfills, from trucks, from power plants, you also emit a host of other co-pollutants. And the American Journal of Public Health just found out that race is the greatest determinant of one's exposure to environmental hazards because it's typically communities of color that live near the landfills, the power plants, or the freeways. So when you cut carbon in air pollution hotspots, you also improve air quality. So that's kind of one of our key goals. Next slide. And so to get to like that huge emissions reductions goal of like I pointed out, it's to transition our economy to 100%, we need more than a price on carbon. It's I should actually note that a price on carbon is maybe the big fish policy, but it's certainly not the only thing, or arguably there's so many other policies. And while, say, British Columbia has a high tax price on carbon, it's not necessarily the price on carbon that's the most important thing. We don't want to make carbon prices high for the sake of it. California has several complementary policies: a zero emission vehicle mandate, a renewable energy standard, green building standards, energy efficiency standards, a low carbon fuel standards. A study came out that showed that 80% of California's emission reductions are actually not attributable to its carbon price. They're attributable to those sector specific policies. So I think that's, and so the reason why we believe our policy is effective is because we're going to have the cap, which is the only way that you can guarantee emissions will actually go down. And we're going to have the price on carbon from the entities having to buy the permits. But we're also going to have a complementary policy of revenue investment. We're going to invest in things that will reduce emissions. And by doing that, you compound the effect of cutting carbon. And we need to do this as this is just a rough sketch to show you that we're off track right now. Our state has a law that says we have to lower emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. And we're certainly not on track to do that. And we're not on track to hit our 2035 target. And obviously our 2050 target is much more ambitious, and we're not gonna we're not going to hit that. I don't know what the reference point is going to be for the Alliance's cap, how low it's going to be, where it's going to be set at, but I think it's safe to say that it's probably going to be set at least in coordination with state law. So you could set the bar at that. And California's cap declines by 3% every year. It's only been in operation for 2 years. Their carbon market opened in 2013. Emissions decreased by 4% in the first year. And just to give you guys like how cap and trade, or maybe more appropriately cap and invest, how it works, you set the limit. Let's say the limit is 100 tons of carbon, and each permit is worth 1 ton. So obviously you have 100 tons in circulation. So we're still figuring out whether we want to set a fee for people, which would be function like a tax, or whether it can be an auction. And we may also give away some permits for free or at a reduced cost in a time-limited manner to those industries that are trade exposed to help them cope with their higher energy costs so we don't create leakage. And if you do have, in a cap program, we do have the option of trading. We could trade with California. California is trading with Quebec. We could also potentially link up with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and hopefully down the road even with China and other entities. Trading allows for economic efficiency, increases market liquidity. However, there are concerns in the Alliance right now about trading potentially increasing pollution at air pollution hotspots. So whether our policy includes trading is still to be determined. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm going to speculate that as a percentage of permits in circulation in California and in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the number of permits that are actually traded, I think, is actually fairly low. So people call it cap and trade, but cap and invest may actually be a more appropriate term. And I think I should note here that there's, we're talking about bipartisan policies, and the Alliance is nonpartisan. I mean, yes, many of the people whom we have happen to be progressive, but we want to reach out to everybody. And fundamentally, we believe that we can reach out to Republicans or conservatives too. And there's ample evidence, while I certainly agree with Mike that there are a lot of people, there's a sliver of Republicans, the moderate Republicans who support revenue neutral. There's ample evidence to show that Republicans also have supported cap and trade in the past. I mean, California's program was created by moderate Republican Arnold Schwarzenegger. Mitt Romney and George Pataki created the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast. And George W. Bush created the Department of Energy's Loan Guarantee Program, which created Solyndra. So there's plenty of examples of Republicans supporting revenue positive clean energy programs. So we think that if we can show a Republican an effective model of how $1 of public investment leverages private investment and creates jobs and reduces emissions, I mean, to the extent that we can get any moderate Republicans, they might support that too. I mean, that's at least our hope and our belief. And so, next slide, please. And so here's an example, sorry, this is really far for you guys, of what California's money has gone into. It's all gone into reducing emissions. For solar, we see Grid Alternatives has gotten $29.2 million, rooftop solar for low-income companies. Governor Brown wants to have high-speed rail, $750 million from Sacramento down to LA. I know California right now has about $2.2 billion on hand to spend from carbon revenue. For us, it's hard to say how much we would raise. The governor's cap and trade program was going to raise between 1.1 and 1.4 billion. So that might be around the amount of revenue that we could have to invest in clean energy. And there's also a critical equity piece to California. This wasn't initially in their policy. Community of color groups had to come and advocate for it after they signed the bill into law in 2006. They had to ask that that the revenue be spent equitably. So now 25% of California's revenue